right, welcome everybody to the JD Power Travel Podcast. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the Managing Director of Travel, Hospitality, and Retail. And I am joined, as always, by Andrea Stokes, our practice lead for the hospitality industry. Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
And Sarah Baggett, who is our intrepid producer slash marketing person for these podcasts and everything else, and a general, utility infielder for the travel practice. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Well, I thought we'd start off this podcast with talking a little bit about a topic that I know Andrea is interested in, and we all should be interested in. It makes a lot of headlines these days, but something called generative AI or artificial intelligence and how that relates to the travel industry. So, Andrea, what can you tell us about generative AI in the travel industry?
Well, I'm sure everyone is, following Chat GPT and what's happened over the past several months in terms of Chat GPT attracting millions of users in a very, very short time, and following how Chat GPT and other generative AI tools are being used for business in general. But I think in travel, there's a lot of buzz around using generative AI for marketing, writing, a lot of writing, like writing promotions or writing email marketing pieces, or, perhaps travel companies using it to write blog posts and things like that. But I think the main impact on the consumer that is happening is really looking at how generative AI is being used for travel planning and research. So, companies like Expedia, for example, are working on using generative AI during the booking process, and sort of having a way for the consumer to more easily research, search for hotels, search for destinations, right? Maybe enter in the type of trip that they want to take and what they're looking for into an AI bot, for example, and having it produce results, right? Search results for the consumer. So it'll be interesting to see how. So that's an OTA, Expedia, but it'll be interesting to see how the hotel companies, and even the airlines are going to be using generative AI for interactions with the consumer. We at JD Power, we already track uh, the use of online chat in customer service interactions. So in our customer service practice here at JD Power, we have a whole team that are just focused on looking at benchmarks around online chat for customer service, and how consumers feel about that. Are consumers getting good service when they're using online chat? So a lot of generative AI, of course, is already being used there. But it'll just be interesting to see how hotel companies and airlines start to use generative AI on their own websites and also in their mobile apps, and how that evolves. So we'll be tracking that here at JD Power. We are reintroducing our travel app and web studies this year, which will focus on the largest airlines and the largest hotel chains, and how consumers are looking at their experience using apps and websites, what they think, how apps and websites perhaps have evolved post pandemic. We have not conducted these studies since before the pandemic. So we're excited about starting to look at the user experience again.
So this might be too deep a question, but what is the difference between generative AI and a regular algorithm search that might happen on Google? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, algorithms can be based on artificial intelligence, right? But I think the generative AI, it's sort of this more rapid learning, right? So as you may be typing something into chat GPT, and then it provides a response. And then you take that response and you respond using that information. And chat GPT kind of knows then where you're going, and then it learns where what you're looking for and where you're going with your with whatever you're looking to do, for example, and then it responds again. And so there have been a lot of articles about, the experience that people have had with ChatGPT and some of the negative experiences. Like I think there was a story about a reporter was using it and was going back and forth with the chat gpt tool, and it sort of dived deeper into his life and ended up like advising that he leave his wife or something like that. So there's a sort of a dark side to this.
I guess
I haven't
so.
heard of any of that in the travel industry, just so you know.
Maybe they'll just turn that part down when they talk about travel recommendations. I want to book a hotel, so.
Yeah, yeah, right.
We know in other industries that that first contact resolution is so important. So it'll be interesting to see if this generative AI sort of helps that along, improves those touch points and gets the answers faster. It'll be interesting to see what happens with satisfaction with that.
Right, right. There's the customer service part of it, and there's also the sort of how do you help the consumer narrow down decision making, right? There's so many options for travel, and I do see these tools, these generative AI tools helping consumers with decision making, and maybe helping the consumer narrow down the choices, maybe narrow down destinations options, right? And that kind of thing, and then of course, as I mentioned, the travel industry, I believe, is already using tools like this for marketing purposes. So again, creating a ad copy or email copy, for example, for marketing. So
All right. Well, thanks. That is interesting and, I don't know, sometimes scary, really, when you think about it, how AI might be able to take over the world. So, anyway, on to our next topic. Andrea, this is also one for you. Some of the news articles I've read recently about the hospitality industry is all around pricing and the daily room rates and how they're moving or not moving, as the case may be. And so, Andrea, what kind of update do you have on the macro hotel industry and room rates?
yes, so STR just released its analysis for the month of May 2023 compared to May of 2022. And I thought it was interesting that, occupancy is pretty flat, even a little bit down compared to last May, which is interesting given, how much of a surge there was in travel last year in 2022. But that said, STR did report that room rates are still higher. So room rates in the US in May of 23 were higher than May of 2022. And that's on top of the already high room rates we saw in 2022. So it's interesting, is hotels do not seem to be reducing rates to stimulate demand and occupancy. It seems like, they're trying to hold rate as much as possible. And we did see this last year as well. It's just that there was much higher demand last year. So, I was surprised that occupancy was pretty flat. And that may be inflation talking and affecting hotel demand, affecting travel demand in general. So, be interested to see what happens in the month of June, right? Which is, sort of the beginning of summer.
All right. And what's your prediction? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I do predict, as busy as the airports are and the roads are and some hotels, I do see this summer perhaps as, not as, um, we won't see as heavy travel demand as we did last year. It'll be the same or even maybe down. And I do think that that's really because of inflation, right? And the effects have just sort of compounded over the last months, and consumers are just spending more money on necessities. So discretionary spending like travel is is sort of I think falling by the wayside a little bit. So it'll still be a busy summer. I think it will be perhaps not as crazy as last summer was, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, on that same topic, Andrea, you've got the syndicated hotel study or benchmark study at JD Power. I believe it's going to release in a few weeks. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so our 2023 Hotel Guest Satisfaction Awards will be released on July 26th. We've redesigned the study a little bit for 2023, and we've added questions to sort of track some interesting trends going on in the hotel industry, such as hoteliers installing EV chargers at their hotels. So we're starting to track guests who are looking for EV chargers at hotels or actually charging during their hotel stay. We're also looking at things like the use of meal delivery and Grubhub and those types of things during hotel stays. So, you're staying in a hotel and you want to order a meal through Grubhub, and how the hotel sort of helps facilitate those types of deliveries. And then we're also looking at, of course, back to mobile apps. We've added some questions around all the different ways that guests are using mobile apps and sort of trying to track how mobile apps are going to be evolving over the next few years. Some newer functionality that mobile apps seem to have, or that we know the hotel companies are interested in adding. We're tracking that now. So I'm very excited about the changes that we've made and all of the updates. And the idea is that we will release the 2023 results in July. We've already kicked off our 2024 study. So we are now surveying guests about their hotel stays for our 2024 releases that the first one will come up in October of this year. So very exciting time
All
for
right.
us here.
Andrea, does this study take into account if a guest considered an alternative lodging, maybe an Airbnb or something like that?
Yes, Sarah, that's a great question. Yes, we have tracked that in the past, and we continue to track the usage of short-term rentals by hotel guests. So of course we're starting with hotel guests, but we still find that a lot of hotel guests are also using short-term rentals. Not so much to the level that they were in the past, and especially during the pandemic, but we do still track that. And for the guests who are using short-term rentals, we do ask a few questions about their experience.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. And you'd mentioned charging stations, which brings up the last topic of this podcast, which is what's come to be known as the surprise EV rental, which actually is a thing. I've actually had several news media outlets ask me about this phenomenon, and I wasn't too sure it was actually happening until someone came to my house this past week, and not knowing that I, involved with the JD Power rental car study, started telling me about their experience. They had contacted a rental car company, a well-known rental car brand, and picked their lowest priced vehicle. You'll get something, like a Ford Fiesta or something similar. And when they got to the rental car facility, they were assigned an EV, and they had never driven an EV before. And they started driving off the lot, after a little bit of hand-holding from the folks at the rental car company. Drove off, and they were going from Brooklyn to Boston. And just as they're on the roads in Brooklyn, they realized that they only have a half a charge on the car, in the car battery. And so the projected mileage was going to be 100 miles, which of course it's a little bit longer than 100 miles from Brooklyn to Boston. So they called up the rental car company and said, hey, this thing doesn't look like it's going to make it. Can we come back and get another one as fully charged? And they said, no, you'll make it. You'll be fine. Just keep going. And of course, they didn't make it to their destination. They had downloaded the app. They were looking for recharging stations along the way, and which led into a lot of problems. One didn't have the right connector. There was a charging station for sure, but they weren't able to charge their particular vehicle. Another one was at a hotel, as Andrea mentioned, but was for guests only. The next one was in a private parking lot that they couldn't get into. And they eventually ran the car out of a charge and parked it in a Honda dealership in a small town. And called up the Honda dealership and left them a message saying, hey, you might find a strange car in your parking lot, and this is why. And they got an Uber and Lyft and went on and rented another gas-powered vehicle to get to their destination. But the car rental company did not refund the money and did not have any alternatives. And then I also noted that the rental car company had to go get that EV somehow, which was completely dead and immobile. And really, since Google searched these things, and sure enough, there are plenty of stories out there just like that people are having that surprise EV rental. And if you're not careful, if you don't know what you're getting into, it can be a hassle. The infrastructure, as we've seen in this, heard our guests on this podcast talk about, for the EV experience are not exactly as robust as you might expect them to be, especially in certain areas of the country. Northeast Corridor might be an exception, but these people were traveling in the Northeast Corridor and still had problems. I compare it to when you were in the days of the covered wagon, that you had to plan for, where are the water holes, and can I get to that water hole, and will the water hole have water in it? And I think that's exactly the problem that they've run into in the EVs. So the infrastructure isn't there. So I guess the word to the wise here is that if you haven't had an EV and you are planning a long trip with it, and you never have experienced how to handle an EV, it might be better to go immediately back and get a gas-powered car at this point. Eventually, we're going to solve these problems, I think, but they certainly aren't solved right now. So don't let this surprise EV be part of your vacation plans, I guess is the word for the day.
Well, and Mike, we know that the exposure to driving an EV can increase consideration, but that range anxiety and learning curve of downloading the app, figuring out how to charge it, that's a pretty big barrier to entry. Do you feel like the rental car companies are going to have to standardize how they advertise to customers what type of vehicle they're getting?
Yeah, I think that they're eventually going to learn their lesson here very quickly. This is like any new adoption to me, new technology adoption. There's going to be fits and starts, and there's going to be learning curves. I mean, I think I've actually on this podcast talked about it before, is that when something goes wrong with a rental car, people just walk away from it, just as this couple had done. I mean, they left it. I mean, and there wasn't anything they could do other than call a tow truck, and they weren't about to, incur that cost because a rental car company didn't charge it sufficiently, and it told them, "Oh, no problem, you get to your destination." So they didn't feel any compunction to actually do anything with that rather expensive asset that they left in a parking lot in a small town. Now that's going to create a labor hassle for the rental car company. They have to go get it, and it's not exactly something you could just drive two guys out there and one hops in the car, drives it back, because it's completely dead and it has to be moved somehow. So I think that very rapidly, the rental car companies are going to learn that there are certain things that they need to do, and certain things in situations where they should not rent an EV. And I do believe they are trying to drive adoption and trial, just as you pointed out, Sarah. But I think this is the wrong way to go about it, to kind of put these people in a very unfamiliar situation that in some cases might be quite dangerous. If you ran out of juice in the middle of a I-95, which is a very well-traveled, busily traveled road out here in the East Coast, I don't think that would be a pleasant experience. And then again, how do you get that EV back? So anyway, words to the wise, as I've said. Well, thank you very much for listening to our travel podcast. If you're interested in the things that J.D. Power does, you can go to jdpower.com, go in the upper right-hand corner, look at businesses, and then scroll down to travel and hospitality and click on that. And you'll see all the things that we've been doing and some updates and some interesting stuff that Sarah Baggett actually uploads that you guys can take a look at. And if you got any questions, you can leave them with us. There's a way to contact and reach out to us, and we will see you on the next travel podcast. This is Michael Taylor from JD Power. Thank you.